So, with everything that we've talked about so far in this chapter, we've been dancing around a topic that we now need to address, and that is colligative properties. So, let's talk a little bit about this. So, to introduce this, we got to go back to something we talked about in the last chapter, and that was phase changes. So, back in that chapter, when we were talking about phase changes, we talked about three different types of dynamic equilibria. We talked about the liquid gas equilibrium. We talked about solid liquid, and then finally we talked about solid gas. So those were the three types of dynamic equilibria that we talked about in the last chapter. Now we also talked about pure substances. And so, what we're also going to now do is talk about substances that are present in a solution. So, adding a second component does affect the phase change of a pure substance. And so, that's what we're going to be looking at now for the rest of this chapter. These are called colligative properties. What colligative properties are, these are properties that are dependent on the amount of a dissolved entity. So, these are properties dependent on the amount of a dissolved entity. Not on its chemical identity. Okay, so again, colligative properties, these are properties that are dependent on the amount of a dissolved entity, not on its identity. Now, what are the colligative properties that we are going to study in this chapter? So we're actually going to talk about four different types of properties. So we're going to talk about vapor pressure lowering. We'll talk about freezing point depression, boiling point elevation, and then the last one, osmotic pressure. So those are going to be the next topics that we're going to be taking a look at.